Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode. It's a returning guest episode. Today with me is Ernest Owusu. Ernest is a two-time guest now on the Startup Selling Show. We first met and spoke back in July of 2020. The world's changed a lot since then in some ways, and in a lot of ways, it hasn't changed much at all when it comes to SDRs, sales development, and SDR hiring, which is the main topic of our conversation today. Ernest is the Senior Director of Sales Development at 6Sense, S-E-N-S-E. Ernest, as that Senior Director of Sales Development, he leverages his passion for helping others succeed as well as insights from the field to foster a winning team. He's previously an NFL athlete, and he thrives in team environments full of high collaboration and healthy competition. Outside the office, he also effectively introduces diversity problem by mentoring and empowering underrepresented people so they can confidently grow their career. So in addition to 6Sense, which is where Ernest works, you should also check out salesfortheculture.com, salesfortheculture.com, where Ernest is a co-founder, and he is helping to elevate the visibility of the Black tech community in sales, and a wonderful website for recruiting, networking, learning more about the Black community that's available as wonderful talent, wonderful consultants, people that could be leaders in your business, and some people that are leaders in their business. So definitely go check out Sales for the Culture as you're thinking about this interview and the lessons learned from Ernest. So in our conversation with Ernest, as I mentioned, we talked a lot about SDRs and specifically on the hiring process. So a couple of things we talked about was how to be thinking about SDRs as a team. So as you're coming out of that true startup mode, you're building out your go-to-market team, you're hiring this first couple of SDRs, like how do you divide up a territory? How do you divide up accounts in the first place? How do you think through making sure that each person is accentuating their expertise, accentuating their talents and skills? From there, we also talked about how to assess SDR candidates. We talked about what to do when those candidates, and assessing meaning after the hire, how do you make sure that they're doing the job that you intend them to do? What support should you be giving them in order for them to succeed? And how much is their success their priority and their business and their responsibility? We talked about metrics and measurements and making quick decisions when it comes to hiring and quick decisions when it comes to letting people go. As far as the hiring process, we talked a lot about assessments again, when the candidate comes in, and the importance of speed when it comes to that hiring process. Right now, in 6Sense, Ernest shared how they have a 17-day hiring process. So from the time they get either an inbound resume or the time they do outreach to someone they're recruiting, their goal is to have an offer in that person's hand, if they're the right candidate, in 17 days or less. That's hard work to do when you're lots of moving parts, people working remotely, ways that you want to assess those candidates across different ways, not just their speaking, not just their writing, not just their selling, not just their researching. There's lots of things you got to do in those 17 days to be successful and find those right candidates. From there, we also talked a little bit about the importance of communication as a sales rep, as an SDR. And then from there, we transitioned into recruiting. So where to go find these candidates, how to think about recruiting, how recruiting is an all the time thing, just like sales is an all the time thing. We talked about using sales for the culture as a great marketplace to go and learn about the Black tech culture and the Black tech community that's in Silicon Valley and outside of Silicon Valley that you could be recruiting, hiring, or consulting with, and asking for their advice, paying for people to come in and help you with your hiring process. So really wonderful website and resource, as well as some other tips that he had for going out and recruiting and getting those SDRs in place that you need to have to grow and scale your startup. So that's the gist of the conversation. I think you're really going to dig it. Ernest is a really wonderful person, a dad with 3 kids, triplets, 3 at one time. As I mentioned, ex-NFL athlete and just an all-around good person. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. If you did not hear the first conversation I had with Ernest back in July of 2020, no worries. Definitely go back and check that episode out, but it's not a part 1 or part 2. Both of those work independently. So if you like this interview with Ernest, definitely go back and check that one or any of the other hundreds of episodes now that we've recorded here on the Startup Selling Show. Okay, that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Ernest. Ernest, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Always glad to be back. This is really exciting.
Yeah, it's been too long though. It's been almost 2 years. I was looking back. It was, I think, July 2020, like summer 2020. So we're just starting that pandemic thing. with everything that was happening out there. And the time's gone by really quickly. We have been fortunate enough, though, to have you come in and do a training for our clients in our program. We really appreciate that. And they've always appreciated the value added there. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, of course.
So I wanted you to know, because this morning this came up on LinkedIn. Now, in addition to you as being an ex-NFL player that I follow on LinkedIn, there's a second NFL person that I follow, Russell Wilson, which I did not know how much of a business he has been building outside of his obviously elite sports career. He's got an entire production branding agency that he's growing, and he's got a full LinkedIn profile. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've actually noticed that recently. I think even Tom Brady has a LinkedIn. I think a lot of current and ex-NFL athletes, even not just NFL, but also in the NBA and other sports as well, they're starting to really realize there's a lot of opportunity within LinkedIn, and their PR agents are making sure they're prioritizing that.
Yeah, that was really surprising. Really surprising to see. I haven't really gone around hunting for NFL or sports people on LinkedIn, but it popped up because I think he gave a keynote talk at a recent event, and somehow it popped up on my feed. I'm like, Russell Wilson, there's a football player named that same name. I'm like, oh, it's him. Holy cow. Well, look, I want to spend some time. I mean, obviously, I want to give you a minute or two just to kind of describe who you are, what you do with 6Sense, just to give the listeners a little bit more background beyond what I've shared in the intro. And then I just want to dive into a couple of really tactical questions around things like recruiting and hiring and managing SDRs, including when you might have to make the hard decision to let somebody go. We'd love to hear how your perspective on upskilling, training SDRs, because a lot of times they might come in with less business experience or be proficient in one area, but not another. So I've got some questions around that. And, go this or that way with the conversation as well. But those are two of the main topics. So maybe we just start by asking you, like, hey, Ernest, when people ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I can easily talk through that. So as you mentioned, ex-NFL athlete who stumbled across this amazing, awesome opportunity of being in sales, primarily in tech. So right now I currently work at 6Sense, where I lead our BDR team. And essentially 6Sense is we're in the rev tech space where we essentially help companies capture revenue moments, target accounts accordingly, and boost revenue. So I guess what that essentially means is we make sales, marketing, and RevOps teams more efficient by driving pipeline and ultimately bringing in revenue. So I've been with the company for actually 3 years in May. That happened really quickly. And just leading the BDR team over there, it's been awesome.
Yeah. And I know, I can't remember exactly when it was, but fairly recently you guys raised another big round that brought you over the $1 billion valuation mark. We were just talking offline where you said you've tripled the number of employees at the team now.
Yeah, so I think the term hypergrowth would probably be an understatement. We started last year at roughly 200, 250 employees. Right now we're north of 1,000. And our current valuation is, I think it's like 5.2 billion. So we continue to grow. A lot of companies are seeing value in how we help them hit their revenue targets. And that's part of the reason why we've been growing at the rate we are.
Yeah. So what does that mean for the SDR team? How much is that growing? Is that because of one of the general company measurements people look at is like the rate of hiring engineers versus salespeople at different parts of a company's growth. So how quickly are you ramping up on the SDR team, and what does that look like over the last 6 months, the last 2 years even?
Yeah, so I started May 2019, as I mentioned. At the time, we were a team of roughly 5 BDRs. We started last year with, I think, 14. Right now, we're just shy of 50.
So 50?
Yeah, we grew exponentially. That includes managers as well. We also have a team in London. So, and we made the acquisition of Slintel, so we have a team in India.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And so that's not including the team in India. So that puts us actually closer to more of 70. But if you have really good numbers and process around like justifying the headcount and everything makes sense, then might as well pour more gas onto the fire. So that process of scaling a team from roughly 14 or so to 50 over the course of a year is pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of startups out there that listen to the show that don't even have 50 employees, let alone 50 SDRs. So they're thinking about hiring their first or second SDR right now. When you had those first 5, how did you divide up territory or allocate accounts? Because that's a question that comes up a lot of times, which is, okay, I have 2 or 3 SDRs. Do I just round robin them? Do I do it by industry? Do I do it by company size or target? And I know there's not always a right or wrong answer. But like, how do you think about that? Or what advice do you give to people as they're starting to build out a true team, not just have a person or 2?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it kind of depends on what your motion is. If you have an inbound team versus outbound team, I think a lot of teams or a lot of companies are more interested on like building the outbound motion. The biggest thing with building an outbound motion is you have to learn as quickly as possible. And once you land those nuggets and start getting some consistency around the activities and the criteria to generate pipeline, the minute you can specialize, I'd highly encourage doing that. So if that means having certain people in certain regions where your personas or industries need to be spoken to a certain way, then you do that. So it just depends on kind of where you're at and how much you've been able to learn over a period of time. And if you feel really comfortable with your current motion and 5 SDRs over the entire region is enough, and you can start segmenting, then I'd start doing that.
And the segments could be by industry or vertical or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Industry, vertical, revenue. There are a lot of ways that even technographic data around the certain technologies you're using. It just kind of depends on what your model is and how you all generate revenue. But again, once you can specialize, I'd highly encourage it.
I don't know if you've run across this. I certainly have, where a team, like a CEO might hire, they have their first or second SDR, and then they go to 4 or 5, and they feel a little bit reticent to do any specialization. Either they want to do round robin, or they just, it's sort of like, well, we'll just give everybody the equal number of accounts. And I've always felt like, having sold in very specialized industries in the past, like banking and financial markets, I knew how important it was to understand the lingo and the dialect, if you will. But yet a lot of founders are worried about missing out or something. I don't know. Like, why are people usually avoiding doing that specialization?
Yeah, I think with that specialization, again, the hardest part, in my opinion, building outbound motion is learning really quickly. And once you do get a good rhythm, it feels comfortable at times to keep that system and just keep running with it. Because when you do specialize and segment even further, that does mean you have to look, because you might realize that like the activities and the personas and all these metrics that align to success with the broader approach aren't necessarily intact for a more specialized or segmented approach. So that does require you to really dig and try to understand and learn quickly. And I think sometimes that's a little bit not overwhelming, but intimidating at times to people. But again, similar to your experience, we have certain BDRs here who are probably going after certain verticals, obviously by certain regions. And we've noticed that when you have a system like that, then they just know the personas really well. They know the use cases really well, and it's a lot easier to get meetings.
Is there any expectation that you bring in an SDR and you say, look, you're going to we'll use banking and even a subset of banking, maybe it's top 200 banks, Wells Fargo down, and maybe that SDR doesn't have a lot of specific experience in that industry. Do you have any benchmarks or expectations in terms of how long it should take an SDR to develop some proficiency, not just about like clicking the send button and send it on emails, but actually being able to talk to somebody in that sort of secret language that might be in banking or pharmaceuticals or whatever other industry?
That's a good question. So the ramp expectations I typically have is we want to have someone ramped within a 3-month period of time. And honestly, the best way to get that done is by doing. So whether that's, if you're a phone-centric team, they're actually getting on the phone, or if they're using emails, whatever it may be, the sooner you can get them to produce activity and gather feedback from that, learn from certain personas of whether or not what this gets them to tick versus this doesn't get them to tick, or this is someone that we generated a meeting with, but it didn't turn into pipeline because they don't fit this certain criteria. Expediting the learnings during that first 3 months is really important. And, I've noticed that once you get past 3 months, if they're still not catching on, then, that's kind of when maybe it's not the right fit.
How much of it is their responsibility to say, look, I'm in this SDR seat and I'm responsible for selling the top 200 banks. Gosh, I should probably go to maybe a couple webinars, or I should read some books, or asked to go to a virtual conference or in person, whatever. How much is it on? Do you put it on them to have that natural curiosity to go learn on their own? And how much is it our responsibility to make sure that they're blocking out the time and even feeding them some of the information?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I'll go back to kind of what we look for in our main profiles. You have to find someone who's naturally curious no matter what. Like the minute you bring someone on who isn't prioritizing that, or someone who is going to be looking for someone to give them the answers as opposed to them finding them on their own, especially with newer organizations who don't have the entire function built out. It's first on the hiring manager to identify that and make sure you vet it out through the process. But it's really tough to foster curiosity. You can't really force someone to be naturally curious. And unfortunately, in an environment where things do need to be learned and you kind of have to adjust on the fly, it's a requirement. So you just have to be really good about bringing that on initially through your interview process.
I feel like we went down a negative track here because we're talking about non-performance, but while we're on the track, we'll come back to the positive stuff. So now, okay, you hired somebody, you had the best intentions, you thought they were great, you did all the screening, and you're finding out they're just not producing. Aside from booking meetings or hitting basic metrics or benchmarks, are there other signals that you're looking for that you might say, you know what, this just isn't the right fit? I mean, obviously, if they're culturally not a good fit, that's pretty obvious or should be. But is there any other signals that would indicate to you that, yeah, they're supposed to book 10 a month meetings and they're doing 6 and they're kind of like doing it, but not really. And now it's like, well, if I take that person out, now it's like, I got another 3 months.
Yeah.
You know the drill, right? I mean, it's the opportunity cost. So the tendency is like, well, like, is good enough good enough? Maybe it is. I don't want to shake the trees, but gosh, this person's not really hitting quote. It's easy if they're doing 0. Yeah. Like, look, you've been here 3 months and you don't even know the difference between Wells Fargo and Golden One Credit Union. Like, all right, you're out. But if they're booking 6 and they're kind of doing it, but not to expectations, like, what else do you use as a means to give yourself some solace in letting them go?
That's the tough part, especially if you haven't quite figured out your motion. Knowing what your number should be can be challenging at times. But for us, like, we have extremely clear performance management, and essentially we goal our SDRs or BDRs on a monthly basis. And if there's ever a point where you're at 70% of your target twice within a 3-month period, that's when we execute some kind of corrective action. So from an attainment standpoint, again, we know our numbers really well. We know what we should expect from everyone. And if you're falling in that range, then it does mean you need a little bit of help. Now, before that, right, because some people may not have time to wait 3 months to see whether or not someone's going to pan out. Again, this goes back to your hiring profile of what you're looking for, and the aspects of curiosity, how greedy someone is, the business acumen, which I can touch on in a bit because it's really important. I think that's probably the main thing that people let people go for, and then just like that natural like conscientiousness of like, how well organized are you? Are you competitive? Are you always like trying to think of different ways to tap and find opportunities? We lean heavily on those, and the minute we see that someone does not have one of those qualities after they've interviewed and showed it to us, then we start putting on a radar of like, okay, we know this is going to be someone who probably in the next couple of months won't pan out. So we coach them to the best of our ability. But, at the end of the day, the difference between a phenomenal BDR and an average BDR is like can make and break your number. And you might feel the pain of that 1 or 2 month period of time where you don't have that person who's supposed to be in seat and you don't get the pipeline. But the minute you really execute your hiring process well and get that person in there, it's totally worth it.
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Ernest Owusu. Listen, if you're listening to this conversation, you're thinking about your sales team, you're thinking about how you're growing and scaling your sales process, chances are you might need a little bit of help with that, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of coaching or mentoring. And even if you don't feel like you have it, you just want to get a second set of eyes on what you're doing and are you moving in the right direction, then we're here to help. Here at Sales Quality, that's exactly what we do each and every day. We work with early stage B2B tech startups. We help them build and implement a repeatable, scalable sales process that includes everything from sound lead generation strategies, outbound, inbound, webinars, conferences, all the way through to product demos, writing proposals, thinking about risk reduction, getting contracts signed. How do you implement? How do you build a customer success system and a customer success team? And then, of course, all of the other pieces that go along with scaling your sales process, which is people. A lot of what we're talking about today. So lots of ways that we can help you if you're growing and scaling your B2B tech startup. If you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, just head over to Qualia, Qualia.com. One thing I'd highly recommend is you go over to the top of the website at Sales Qualia. There's a link that says live events. So pretty much every week and at least every month, we're running either a recorded or a live event or webinar. It's an opportunity for us to teach the core frameworks, the core systems, how you should be thinking about growing and scaling your startup. So it's a great opportunity for you to come in and learn in a class setting with other B2B tech founders just like you. And if you want some more help after that, then we can talk about how our coaching program works and if or how you might be a fit. So definitely recommend going to salesquality.com, check out live events. You can also download a copy of my best-selling book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. That title should tell it all. Add yourself to our email list so you can find out more about when we're having new podcast episodes, more live events, and other opportunities to learn about how to scale your startup. So that's it for now. Let's head back to the conversation with Ernest Owusu. What would be some examples of business acumen? What would be examples like, and specifically, how would you look for organization, which
Yeah,
is less, I mean, you can see it when you see it, you know it. When you
yeah,
don't have it, you know it, but it could be hard to measure in some way. So how
definitely.
about
Yeah.
those two areas that you touched on?
So business acumen is actually very easy to take a look at. And it's something that, again, we don't compromise that in our interview process. And the way we do that is essentially we have our candidates do a writing assignment where we give
Mm,
them a certain scenario. And one is it's good to see how they write, but it's more the most important thing when I talk about business acumen, I should probably, pull back a bit. It's more of business acumen potential. Like I can be completely transparent with you. I came from the NFL. I barely knew what marketing was when I started out as an SDR, right? But I did have business acumen potential. I went to Cal, like had a solid degree. But when I say business acumen potential, I'm talking about can someone take a look at a company, understand what the personas of the company do, understand what your product does, and find a piece of personalization and make it relevant to why they should talk to you. That's what we talk about when we mean business acumen. And
mm,
through a writing assignment, or if you do like a mock cold call in an interview, you can pull that out. So if you bring someone on board and like I hear at times some SDR leaders and CROs calling this connecting the dots. If someone's
mm.
having a really hard time connecting why a certain company and a certain persona should buy your product, that should immediately raise red flags because that is one of the most challenging things to coach someone on. And we've been able to do that through like really dedicated time of like just taking as many reps as possible and using question-based coaching to help them pull out and understand what a business does. But the challenging aspect of that is it's really hard to know when someone hits that, and sometimes it takes really long for someone to be able to achieve that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I always go back to my experience in banks. So if I'm selling to a top 200 bank, maybe it's bank number, whatever, 27 on the list. There's tons of info, right? They're probably publicly traded. So I can go to press releases, I can go to their annual reports. Everybody's going to be on LinkedIn. I can look at articles. I can look at where their leaders are at conferences speaking. I mean, that's all of those things are the content, they're connecting the dots idea so that when I'm doing that outbound email or doing that cold call, I should have that stuff. And I'm not going to be able to use all that information in a cold call, but
Mhm.
it's like one or two little nuances in there that provides a personalization. Is that what you mean specifically?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly that. I think you said it perfectly, right? So it's like if you see that someone's at a conference and they're attending this one event, some SDRs struggle with trying to be able to pull that piece of information and make it relevant to why they should have a conversation about your product.
Mm,
And some do it really easily. Some have a hard time with that, and the ones that have a hard time with that, it's really challenging because like this game has evolved so much over the past couple of years. It's no longer just a spray and pray, hammer the phone. Like you have to be very consultative. And if someone struggles with the ability to take relevant information and tie it back to why they should have a conversation with their company, that it is a skill and it can be mastered, but it's very difficult to teach that.
mm. What do you do in situations though, like not to overly generalize, but many SDRs are coming out of university. They're pretty junior in their career. They're certainly, more elder or more experienced SDRs out there. They do a great job, but most of the time you can assume that SDRs are going to be, just a couple of years of business experience. So they don't have the sort of the moxie or the chops to see those things in the way that somebody that's been doing sales for 15 years.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering about that gap. It's almost like the unknown unknown. They don't
Yeah,
know that fact that that executive went to that conference on legal and regulatory environment makes a difference because, that's a big shift in the banking industry over the last 3 years and blah, 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 blah. Like they can't kind of make those dots
yeah.
connect.
And that's the reason why. So we have a writing assignment in our interview process where we ask them to, we give them a specific persona and a company and say, do your best effort to research this company and tell us why they should buy 6Sense. And
Mm,
and through that, you get a lot of different reasons. You see, they have this sort of funding. I saw this one initiative on their website. This person is, a sports fan and revenue helps. There are things that you can do to make things relevant, which is
yeah.
it's fun. It's fun and creative. But even in that, like when you do that and then you pressure test them in an interview of like how and why this means they should buy your product, like that's where we talk about the business acumen potential because some people some people might have like a finance background or like some kind of M&A background where it's really easy to pull information and connect the dots and versus others who like maybe didn't study anything relevant to business in college and They might say that this person traveled overseas and they had a hard time doing X, Y, and Z, and this is why this relates to our product and why it should talk to us. But at least it shows that they can take something and make it relevant to why someone should buy our product. And that presents potential as opposed to like the true business acumen of like 15, 20 years in the industry.
Sounds like hiring SDRs is really hard.
It is.
Just like imagining, I mean, I know myself, we're a small business and we're hiring somebody and we're always hiring at this point and for some role because we're building and growing and or somebody's leaving. And it's like, it's so hard to hire. And, you get 3-4 interviews in and then all of a sudden you see the signal, you're like, oh, we can't hire this person, 100%. And you're like, or worse, right? You hire them and they're 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in, 8 weeks in, 3 months in, you just realize like, it's so painful. It's so painful. I mean, I don't even know how you talk to like a startup CEO is like, look, I just got a seed round. I just got an A round. My investor said, build your go-to-market team because you got to go from 1 to 3 million in revenue or 3 to 10 next 18 months. And now you're telling me like I could do all that stuff just to hopefully find somebody who's going to work out. It just makes me want to.
It's challenging. It's very challenging.
But you're saying you just got to suck it up and do it. Otherwise, be stuck with some performers.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say, especially with the SDR, BDR role, like the average tenure is like a year and a half. So like even in that, you're constantly recruiting people over and over again. And it's definitely a skill that like when you do have this team, you got to really nail it down because otherwise you're going to be stuck with people that are just not going to help you hit your goals.
Cool. All right. I want to change gears a little bit because one of the questions I was going to ask around SDR communication, like I get lots of emails. You get lots of emails. They're cold. They're LinkedIn. They're emails in my inbox. Sometimes they're for stuff I have no idea why people would think I'd be remotely interested in buying those products like SOC 2 compliance or mobile apps. But the construction of those emails are just so poor. Like the grammar is bad. There's mistakes in the writing. There's no conciseness. There's like get to the point kind of thing. You're just, I guess what you're saying, you just test all that stuff out from the beginning. Plus you probably have like a library of templates that work pretty well.
Yeah, we do. And the thing is, I think what's more important, especially, I think a lot of founders, like everyone has aspirations of growing their business and scaling it to high level. Like there needs to be a standard and a best in class way of how to do things. That's what we use before anything else. So like we teach people the very first thing we teach is like, this is exactly how you need to construct an email. Like personalize up here, personalize in the middle, personalize this in the lower portion of that. So we have expectations and standards that whenever we send an email, like this is what we're expecting, we're also scoring them on that. So to try and make something that at times can be somewhat qualitative, we've attached scoring around like how would you personalize the subject line? How well did you personalize the relevancy to what a product does? Did you have a call to action? Was the word count under 125 words, right? So we're very prescriptive around like what good is. And this is from all types of outreach, from calls, emails, social touches. So whenever someone does send something or communicate to a prospect, they know what to expect and we know what to expect and how we can coach them on it.
So if we switch gears and talk a little bit about the broader labor market. So, there's the Great Resignation, there's remote work has become the standard. There's lots of competition for salespeople because especially in the tech world, there's lots of money out there all designed to help companies grow, right? And to grow, you got to hire salespeople. So now you get this almost dilution of value relative to the dollar that you're spending. So I'd love to hear how you personally go out and recruit, or more specifically, how would like a startup founder who's got, $1 million, $2 million in revenue, mostly on their own backs of selling, a little bit of help around it, but now they got to scale that team and build out a go-to-market team. What's some of the best ways to think about recruiting as well?
Yeah. So I think my one piece of advice for anyone who's about to hire or has not hired SDRs before is run an extremely tight, efficient process because SDRs are getting snatched up right and left. And like, if you wait 3 or 4 weeks to hire someone, they enter into your process, and you wait 3 or 4 weeks, they'll get an offer potentially better than yours at the company, and they'll be gone. So one metric that we try really hard to hold ourselves to, and it's not always easy because of scheduling conflicts and using internal stakeholders around who are going to be involved in the process, is the minute someone, starts a process with us, whether that may be us reaching out to them or them filling out a form on our website, we want to have an offer in their hand within 17 days. And that means, and that's pretty quick, right? But the reason for that is because it's hyper competitive right now. And if you don't try and sprint through the process with the candidate and your team, then you're going to probably lose people. So I'd say, fortunately, we don't have the worst, if you want to call it like loss rate, if you want to call it that way, think about a sales cycle. Because once we talk to someone, we're trying really hard to get them through as quickly as possible. But I know a lot of companies really struggle with that. And the biggest reason, in my opinion, is the speed at which they're pushing people through the process, as well as even the structure around like the compensation and career opportunities and things like that.
Okay. So how do you do that in 17 days? Because I would think of, you just consider a standard interview process, resume comes in, or you do the outreach. If you're doing the outbound for the candidate, you do the screening call, first kind of big interview, second interview, meet the team. There's a project in there somewhere.
Yep.
It's kind of a lot to jam into 17 days. Like if it's March the 1st, the lead comes in, you're saying you get an offer by the 17th, and there's a couple weekends in there.
Exactly. So what we typically do is the minute someone says yes, we'll call them right away and try and
yes to a meeting, or yes, I'm interested.
Exactly. Like, yes, I'm interested, or yes.
Sounds a lot like sales leads.
It is. We honestly treat it like a sales process. So it's like it's like an inbound, right? So like the minute someone fills out a form, so they want to apply for the role, and we look at their resume, it looks like a solid candidate, we'll schedule that next meeting the next day, just more like a meet and greet to sell them the opportunity, to get them excited about what we're doing here. And then we'll immediately pass them a writing assignment that has to be done within 48 hours. The minute we get that writing assignment back, we schedule a meeting with the hiring manager. That's where we really drill into. That's like a longer one, like 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. We'll drill into the writing assignment. We'll ask all the questions around our criteria we look for. If that goes well, we'll tell them like, hey, what's your availability of these next 4 days? Because I'd love to, if we feel confident as a hiring manager, because I want to get you in front of the rest of the team and see what they think. So we'll get their availability on that call, go to our counterparts and say, hey, like this is when the person can talk. Please, let's all try and find a way to prioritize this because I want to sprint them through the process. When that last step is done, and typically people are usually accommodating to it. When that last step is done, then the final step, which would be a conversation with me. Again, everyone is in hyper speed of trying to get this done as quickly as possible. If they all feel good about the person, I'll do whatever I can to try and meet them the day after or 2 days afterwards. And that's how we've been able to kind of honor that 17-day period while still respecting the fact that they're probably interviewing other companies and maybe they might have a job. Who knows what's going on, but that's been helpful for us.
So immediately after that first screen, you're giving them that writing assignment.
Yep.
As almost like their ticket to the interview. So even if you're recruiting them, you say, hey, it looks like you're a kick-ass candidate for this. We'd love to have you think about joining. If they go, yeah, I'm interested. Cool. Here's a homework assignment.
Yep. And I will say, initially, when we were thinking about that, especially once we realized that we had to kind of shorten our cycle down because of how competitive things were, we were apprehensive about doing that, especially for people that we were convincing to apply for a job. But we just knew that we had to try and do whatever we could to speed things up. And the reality is, if someone pushes back because they have another job or if something comes up, we're going to respect that. But we at least try and set some kind of expectation around trying to get things done as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And also, if they're that interested in the opportunity, they're going to carve out the time as well.
That's the key. Exactly.
It's no different than a lead that says, I can't make the demo, send me a deck.
Exactly.
If you're really interested in the product, how about I show you the product instead of sending you a PDF?
Exactly. And that's also an indication of the fact that if someone, appears to be interested, or someone who did an inbound to us, so it's like someone who wanted a job from us as opposed to us reaching out to them, if they don't submit their information after the 48-hour period, then typically it means they don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah, internally, and I don't know if this is perfect or not, but we actually require people to answer 3 questions as part of their cover letter. And it's interesting to see how much time people spend or don't spend on those questions. And some platforms, I think like ZipRecruiter reviews in the past, they actually will tell you how long a person spent on that question. So you can see like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes for those 3 questions versus sometimes it's like 27 minutes, 16 minutes, 12 minutes. You're like, wow, this person spent an hour applying to this job.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah.
And awesome. So that helps you get a gauge for how interested are they. And then of course they have usually better responses. They're more thoughtful. And it also gets you a chance to get their personality a little bit. Like one of the questions we've asked in the past is like, who's your favorite superhero and why? Or if you could be a Star Wars character, who would you be and why?
Mm-hmm.
One time we asked that Star Wars question and we got a response back, which was, oh, great, another bro question. And I was
Interesting.
like, okay. I mean, I was trying to be open to the feedback. I was like, okay, is that a bro question? Because my wife loves Star Wars. It's like her favorite movie. I didn't think Star Wars was like a bro thing
I didn't
as
think it
much
was
as like,
either.
who's your favorite NFL team? That would be different, you
Yeah,
know?
I wouldn't put it into that category. That's an interesting
I wouldn't
response.
either. But to the point, it's like, well, so you're applying for the job. That was your answer. And you still hit submit and sent the resume. Like that was a little weird to me. Like obviously we didn't even bother with that person.
Of course not.
But you get those kinds of things. You're like, okay, well, that's an easy one to put into the no pile. But again, from a writing standpoint, it does help a little bit to see kind of where they are from a skill set.
Yeah.
So what about places to recruit? And specifically, also, I would love for you to talk a little bit about sales for the culture, because we talk about diversity and getting more people in the Black community in technology. And there are already a lot, which you've shown with sales for the culture and the listings that you have there. But so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. And more broadly, like where do you go find these SDRs and engage in conversations with them?
Yeah. So I think from a diversity perspective, the biggest trap that people fall into is just by tapping their friends' shoulders and getting referrals and, recruiting people that are just like you, which, there are a lot of studies and research around like why you need diverse teams and how diverse teams help you solve, more complex problems. So I just encourage everyone not to try and take that approach, though. I mean, it's the easier route, call it like it is. But for companies that are growing, you want to be as diverse as possible. So sales for culture has been awesome. Right now, I think we're just north of 1,000 people across, BDRs, AEs, sales leadership, et cetera. We have active engagement in there of people that want to get into tech and they have questions for other SDRs and SDR leaders. People that are currently SDRs who are trying to find ways to win and get promoted, things like that. So it's been an awesome group. I think right now we're just north of 2 years in the running, and it's where I've recruited people for my team through sales for the culture. I know a lot of companies do as well, but I mean, there are a lot of different things you can do if you're looking for diverse talent. Like contacting HBCUs, going through sales for the culture is an opportunity that people take advantage of. But I think the biggest thing is trying really hard not to just do the traditional route of just going referrals, because in the long run, that's not how you want to build and scale an organization of the exact same people. And again, a lot of research around why you shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's like a business, right? It's great to get some customers through referral. You hope that word of mouth is wonderful. If you're planning to scale your company based on referrals and word of mouth, it's going to be kind of hard to do that.
Exactly.
Right? You need to have a system in place to go find new customers.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have a system to go find new candidates. So where else? I mean, obviously you've got salesfortheculture.com, which is a great place to go. What are some other general places that you have found or you'd recommend, especially to, and you're in a place now with $5 billion valuation, growing like crazy. Everyone has I can imagine you're recruiting. People have like the IPO eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to be part of this thing and watch it go public. So there's a certain attraction, which is a lot different than, the startup with $2 million in seed funding that's doing, just cross 84K MRR, and their founders isn't a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
They're engineers. They don't even know how to do sales. They've just been sprinkling a lot of founder magic to get to that level. Now they've got to recruit, they got to sell the company, they got to get that top-notch SDR. Where are they going to go find somebody?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, and maybe this is just the SDR in me, I'm a huge fan of outbounding. Like going on LinkedIn, looking through people that are recently about to graduate, looking for SDRs who potentially, maybe they don't have a career path at their company. Like if you see someone who's been an SDR for like a year and a half, 2 years, reaching out and asking them, hey, like, where do you want to go, and what's a desire within your career? If you have some kind of career path in your organization, then that typically is pretty exciting for people that have been in the role for a longer period of time. Not more so talk about people that don't want to do this for the rest of their life. There's some people that want to stay as SDRs for their life, which is great. But for the ones that have been in the role for like a year and a half, 2 years, reaching out to them and just asking them like where they want to go, if there's an opportunity at the organization, and just having a conversation. But, we do all things, right? So we have Sales for the Culture. We have amazing organizations like SV Academy, where we find talent through there. We have our inbound flow through our website, but also our team just like does pure outreach, and we talk to people, and get them excited about our opportunity, and we sign them.
Cool. So it's just like selling.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we try to explain it to our founders that we work with as clients. It's a sales funnel. You should always be recruiting, even if you're not hiring, because especially salespeople, right? When you need them, you want to be able to hire quickly. And if you don't have that funnel going, you don't even have, like, you got to have the muscle built
Yep.
to go and recruit. And so just carving out an hour every Friday afternoon to hang out on LinkedIn and block out an hour for a couple quick phone calls, something like that. Because that's also going to tell you a lot about, you can use those conversations to hear what the role should be at your company. Right? If you talk to somebody who's been an SDR for a year and a half, maybe in your industry, and you're saying, this is what I think we need. Well, maybe that SDR is like, nah, dude, that is not going to work.
Exactly.
This is exactly like, no, that's what this company thought too, when they hired me a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
But after the first 3 months, I totally shifted, and this is how I'm doing it. And this is the kind of person you need, and all those kinds of things. So in a way, it's almost like doing customer discovery on your role.
100%. Couldn't agree anymore.
Cool, man. Well, look, man, I know we're coming up to the top of when we've got time scheduled. Is there anything else I haven't asked you about that you wanted to share or talk about, or something that's top of mind, a story you want to tell, updates on your triplets?
Oh yeah. So I will give an update on the triplets. They turned 2 in 8 days. Like,
oh my gosh.
So I will say, conveniently with the pandemic, being home and spending more time with it has been awesome. But I am excited to get back to, some normalcy, which I think we're all hopefully heading that direction. That'd be nice, but we'll see.
Is your company heading back into a in-person environment at some point, or at least part-time?
I think so. I mean, we all have an itch to see each other. One of the cool things about my company is our culture is very strong, and we've been able to maintain it these past 2 years, but I know it'd be so much better just seeing everyone. So we've just recently opened up our offices where you can go in if you'd like. We're very much hybrid model right now. I know the minute we feel like things are a lot more safe than they are right now, we'll all want to get back as quick as we can.
Yeah, I'm feeling it too. I mean, we've always been remote as a company, but even with our clients, every 3 times a year, we would bring them into, we run a 2-day event in San Francisco, and they'd all fly in, and there's a chance to meet people in person that, you see over Zoom for a year, and then all of a sudden they come and you get to meet them. And then there's the outside of the work stuff. It's going to dinner at night and getting to know people and watching those relationships grow. I had my first in-person client meeting in 2 years about a month ago.
How was it?
It was bizarre. And it was really ad hoc. It was somebody I'd been talking to that was interested in working with us. And I happened to be driving from Davis to San Mateo. My son was doing a soccer tournament, and we were driving on a Friday. I said, hey, man, like, I'm going to be swinging by San Francisco. You want to meet up for like a late afternoon coffee or something? And he's like, sure. And it was just so weird to see that person in person and shake their hand and sit down. And it was like very odd.
I agree.
Awkward in some ways. I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, I have to not do weird things with my hands now, because I have to make sure that my belt is buckled. And I got all these weird things that go with, like, seeing, like, oh crap, I have to find a pair of socks now to wear to this meeting.
I can attest to that. I actually went to my first in-person event 2 weeks ago, and I felt so awkward talking to people. And like, obviously I'm talking to people all day long. I'm in sales on Zoom, but like, talking to someone in person that wasn't on my team just felt really awkward at first. So I was glad that I got that out of the way.
Yeah. I mean, we've been meeting up with friends and stuff for a while, and, picnics and come over to the house, but it's just in that business conversation, it's so different. And we also added somebody to our team that happens to be pretty local to where I am. And so last week, we went and actually met in person. Like, hey, why don't we just meet, hang out, have a lunch together? And I was like, wow. We can get so much more work done in 3 hours hanging out together. So we just decided we're going to meet every Friday for a couple of hours, or at least every other Friday, and just do a jam session. No agenda necessarily. If there's stuff that's important to work on, we'll do it. But just like sitting in a hotel lobby together and working on stuff so we can bounce ideas off, or you can understand more about how I'm thinking about things. It's just, it's like, wow, be a lot more efficient now in person. You'd think it'd be efficient to be remote, but I'm actually now feeling the opposite, where so many things get lost because you're not there in the office. And I want to take full advantage of the opportunity. This person's in proximity. And then it was like, oh, I should just get on a plane and fly to Atlanta and see Amy, our head of ops, because I've never met her in person in 2.5 years of working there.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I could get a plane ticket now and fly there, and it's gonna be like $500. I should just go do that.
And on that note of not meeting your team, the weirdest thing for me is as I mentioned earlier, the average tenure for an SDR is 1.5 years. I've had people that I've hired and promoted, and I never have seen them in person.
Oh, wow.
It's so weird. It's so weird. Like people that I went through the interview process, they dominated, they did an awesome job on the team, and now they're AEs, and just never met them.
Wow. They were a deep fake all this time.
Exactly.
Just a simulation, man. We're all living in a simulation on the back of a turtle.
Exactly.
Well, good, man. It's so good to talk to you. At some point, we should meet in person because we're not that far away. So if you're heading into San Francisco anytime soon, let me know, because I'm starting to itch to spend a day or two there every so often like I used to. So let me know. I'm buying lunch or coffee or whatever else you want. My treat.
Done. Deal. We'll make it happen.
Cool, man. Anything else you want to share? Any other causes that you want to promote? Where can people go find you if they want to learn more about the stuff that you shared, more about 6Sense?
Yeah, sure. So I think so an easy easy place to go. Obviously, 6Sense, we're growing. A lot of revenue orgs find value in our product from marketing ops, from rev ops, marketing, sales. Our solution definitely will help you where you want to go in terms of being able to capture revenue moments, boost your revenue. So go to 6sense.com, get a sense of what we do. Obviously, you can reach out to me directly, Ernest Owusu. I'd like to say I was pretty active on LinkedIn, not as much anymore. I toned it down a bit. But if you're just trying to learn more about the SDR game, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or even about 6Sense. I'm more than happy to connect with anyone over here on what we do.
And that's the number 6Sense.
Exactly.
As in touchy-feely sense.
100%.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll put a link to the company in the show notes, or people can just type probably some version of 6Sense into Google and they'll find it. I think you're the only Ernest Owusu on LinkedIn. If you find more than one, just look for the guy that's the ex-NFL athlete, and you'll know that you've got the right person that went to Cal or Berkeley, depending on what day of the week it is.
That's the trigger, because you won't find very many of those.
Not to be confused with Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, it's so good to see you and catch up. Thanks for sharing your wisdom as always, and looking forward to the next time sometime soon.
Awesome. Good to see you too.
All right. We'll see you.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. That was a lot of fun. Always enjoy the conversation with Ernest. I wish he was that person I could talk to every week to get some advice and get his perspective on sales and sales development. So listen, if you reach this part of the conversation, it tells me you're probably digging the content. So whether this is your first episode or your 100th episode that you've listened to, would absolutely recommend clicking that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's on Apple Podcast, iTunes, or some other, well, I guess iTunes used to be, now no longer is. That is what is Apple Podcast. Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure you subscribe. We're pumping out episodes pretty much every week at this point. Many interviews with experts like Ernest, as well as some replays of Facebook, or I should say LinkedIn Lives, webinars, trainings that I've done, making sure we're pumping out lots of content to you so you can learn best practices for learning and scaling, learning to grow and scale your startup. So click subscribe, leave a review as well. We read every review. If you've got suggestions on people or topics you'd love for us to cover, that'd be great to hear from you. And then finally, tell a friend or 10. Viral is still the best way for people to learn about podcasts. So if you would, please let a friend or 10 know about the show, about this episode. Flick it over to them on an email or a text message and say, hey, check this out, because nothing helps us more than you getting the word out. So that's it for now. That's a wrap on this episode of the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci, and we will catch you the next time. See ya.